Come on, boys. We's gonna give these Space Marine kits a good crumping.
Boss, I brought me stabber, boss. Let me at 'em.
Wave the lucky stick, Macari. Whoa!
So it's no secret based on the content of this channel that I'm a fan of A, card games, and B, Warhammer of the 40,000. The problem is the last game I played that mixed the two was the, may it rest in peace, Conquest, which, while strictly a dueling card game, was atypical in the sense that it dipped its toes heavily into area control. That aside, I think I might have found my next fix in the form of Warpforge. Yes, it's got more pixels than your average bear, and yes, this demo I played during the Warhammer Skulls celebration is still supposedly in a pre-alpha stage, but I have to admit this has touched me in a way that should only be left to one's imagination. I do recall playing this game's spiritual predecessor Horus Heresy Legions in months past, but for me it lacked any kind of je ne sais quoi to make it past the gates of my very discriminating taste for non-paper based entertainment. But I'll be dipped in shizzle though, I'm struggling to find words to grumble about this little grimdark piggy. A lot of the gameplay, it's fair to be said, follows a fairly predictable pattern. You build a deck, in this stage of development only available in the draft play mode. You draw an opening hand of 3 cards, which you can choose to mulligan any or all of, and then you play cards from hand, and your available resources tick up by 1 each turn. So far, so straightforward. But where it brings the sexy is in a number of ways. Each faction, of which there are currently 6 available to choose from, will give you a choice of warlords to lead your merry band. Your selection of cards then brings a number of unique keywords that accentuate their playstyle. The Space Marines are your most vanilla of choices and have a generous mix of goodness. Orcs are all about swarm tactics. They're a tied keyword, allowing you to cast multiples of the same card each turn. Eldari have shurikens that do first strike damage before your target retaliates, and leave behind soul shards after death that can buff your other cards. Chaos are all about gifting marks of the ruinous powers to give one of 4 different buffs to troops, which is a catch-all term for every unit other than your warlord on the battlefield. Tyranids have synapse that will allow you to cast stratagems, Warpforge's version of spells, onto your unit and then those adjacent to them. And Necrons, well, you know they be all about the reanimation. Laying as a pile of trash on the battlefield for the remainder of the next turn, just waiting to be brought back into the fray. It's that flavour for each faction that I hasten to add does not make any of them one-dimensional, because there's still plenty of crossover in power level and keywords shared. It's what really grabs you by the loins and whispers sweet nothings until you relent to play just one more game. Dribbling aside though, where do you actually start? Well, the game has 6 fairly swift tutorials that each tease new elements of the game and effectively tell you what to do for the first 3/4 of the scene that's been set, and then you use the information you've just been taught to do the rest on your own. As tutorials go, I think it's up there. I've seen people get uptight about not being able to inspect the cards whilst the game manhandles your actions, but that was a small price to pay to whiz through the game's core rules in such a thematic way. You've then got choices. You can engage in practice games against bots, using one of the handful of pre-constructed decks for each faction, with an average of 2 or 3 different warlords playable in each. Or you can queue up in the game's multiplayer mode against a random opponent. As of now, there's no visible ranking or MMR system, but I suspect that's one of the reasons the game is still in pre-alpha, because the actual gameplay feels pretty refined to me, and is the area of the game that needs least development. You do have to win one game in multiplayer, somewhat bizarrely, to unlock draft mode, but once there you'll get to pick in your deck in batches of 3 cards at a time. I've seen it done this way before, and pick in 1 card at a time, which I personally prefer, but I can also see that the swiftness of this approach could be appealing too. Each 3-card selection seems to have its own name, which suggests to me that the cards in each mini-group are fixed. But again, I haven't played enough. Only 6 hours at the time of recording this to know if that's the case or not. Once you've curated your 30 card deck, then again you get queued up against opponents until you get to either 12 wins or 3 losses, whichever comes first. One would assume that you get pitted up against those at a similar win rate as you, but I don't have a Scooby whether that's the case because the UI here is pretty rudimentary. So what else tickles my pickle? Well, I've got this far into the video without mentioning the ability to select a melee or ranged attack with your battlefield units. But why should you care? Well, as I've already alluded to, when you attack you're also going to get thwacked back. And so, because each unit has different damage profiles for both, you can pick and choose the most beneficial for you. So simple, so elegant, but this small thing can really make you feel superior when you meta the shizzle out of your opponent and have the means to do the most damage, taking little in return. What's more, the identity of your warlord is more than just a big pool of health and some damage output. Each bring their own talents, which will see you draw a specific type of card every turn, which can only be used once. They're not always the most impactful, but they stop you running out of steam and allow you to be a bit more economical with your choices. Some of the troops also have this ability, but obviously it's a lot harder keeping those guys alive. The plethora of keywords are mostly variations on a theme, but I didn't find one that felt superfluous. Camouflage protects you from being targeted by spells, and stealth will temporarily obscure you from any interaction. Blind will nerf your range damage for a turn. Armour nerfs incoming damage by 1, and vulnerable increases incoming damage. Yes, you'll be hovering over cards for a while until it all becomes familiar, but everything feels relatively straightforward. I didn't notice any weird interactions or loopholes in the basic mechanics like can so often happen with keyword heavy games. Then there's the spit and polish. Man, this game is a looker. Each drawl introduces you to your battlefield in pretty swish fashion, and so much of the graphical touches when you play cards and interact are really tight and thematic, and importantly do very little to slow the game down. And the voiceover adds a bit of flair and immersion, but as you can see with your own eyes, this is a beautiful looking game. As for my concerns, well, they're concerns I'd probably have for any dueling video card game like this. Will the game's pay-to-play elements be a barrier to entry? Will it even worse be pay-to-win, where it's next to impossible to grind out the resources to build competitive decks on your own? Or will a pay barrier block you at every turn? Can we glean anything from Horus Heresy Legions, where the consistency seems to be it's a little bit pay-to-win, but not egregiously so? There are still means to succeed if you don't want to shell over a digital fortune. But at the end of the day, expanding your collection will be naturally slower. I'm also eager to see how they make the game feel competitive. What will the constructed ranking system feel like? And for that matter, what will deck building look like? What rewards and costs will be associated with the draft or any other limited formats they introduce? And how big will the initial release of cards be? Have we seen all the factions the game will offer upon release? Don't get me wrong, I think I can live with what we've got so far, so long as what comes after has a reasonable cadence to it. As far as the others go, there's still a lot to find out. One thing for sure, I will be keeping a close eye on Warpforge's development, and I highly suggest you do too. This is definitely something that will flutter your putter if you're a fan of games like Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone. Keep an eye out for any further demos of the game on their website. Alas, I've been the voice in your head, and this video has ended.
I am eternal. Victory shall be mine.